On today's show, the Courier newspaper makes its triumphant return to print.
And the Courier's Nathalie Sturgeon shares her story of growing up in the foster system.
From your hometown local station, this is Good Day from the Bay with Vicki, Hogarth, and Jonathan Brittain.
Good day from the Bay. I'm Jonathan Brittain.
And I'm Vicki Hogarth.
Vicki, I'm excited for today's show because we have a very familiar face joining us. Nathalie Sturgeon, one of the faces of CHCO-TV and the editor of the Courier.
Yes, as many of you know, CHCO is always growing, and we grew more than ever last year, more than we anticipated when we bought the Courier newspaper to save it from closing. That's when we brought Nathalie onto our team to help helm the Courier and also to join our TV team as a reporter and a host.
We'll sit down with Nathalie later in the show to find out just how much she regrets her decision. If you blink twice, Nathalie, that will let the viewers know you need rescuing.
Yeah, but before we bring out Nathalie, for those of you who don't know, the Courier has been a part of life here in Charlotte County since 1865, and that's before Confederation.
Yes, when CHCO heard the Courier was potentially closing its doors for good, we couldn't let that happen.
Here's a look at the role the Courier has played in the lives of Southwest New Brunswickers from 1865 until today.
In an age when local newspapers are disappearing across the country, one small community paper is quietly making a return. The Courier has been a part of life in Charlotte County, New Brunswick for more than 160 years. Founded in 1865, it predates Confederation. It has survived 2 world wars, outlasted monarchs and governments, and documented every major chapter in Canadian history from a local perspective. For generations, it told the stories of fires and festivals, elections and anniversaries, small-town triumphs, and everyday resilience. But like so many local papers, the Courier eventually fell silent in June of last year.
That changed in the fall of 2024 when CHCO-TV took on the challenge of buying it and bringing it back to life. We didn't make a big announcement. Instead, we quietly got to work, gathering a team of contributors, some familiar, some new. Longtime reporter Barb Rayner returned, so did cartoonist Ted Michener, whose weekly illustrations have captured both local humor and history for years. And journalist Nathalie Sturgeon stepped up as editor, bringing experience, perspective, and a deep commitment to the stories that connect a community.
The goal isn't just to report the news, it's to preserve it. Because as the saying goes, journalism is the first draft of history. And for more than a century and a half, the Courier has done just that. Not just recording events, but helping generations understand where they've been and what they've stood for.
It's the kind of paper that once reported on the installation of a basketball court in St. Stephen. That court is now believed to be the oldest in the world, and was the Courier's archives that helped prove it.
This paper has been the town crier, the time capsule, the quiet witness to everyday life. It is, simply put, the soul of a community put in print.
And now the Courier is entering a new chapter. Still local, still independent, and powered by the people who live the stories they tell.
With CHCO-TV at the helm, the paper is being rebuilt from the ground up, by the community, for the community. We're already publishing online with news stories every day at CHCO.TV. And starting this June, the Courier returns to print, once a month, free to the public.
Local news shouldn't be a luxury. It should be a given, especially here in a region often overlooked by national headlines, but never short on stories that matter.
What happens at the Courier isn't just a comeback. It's a model, a reminder to other communities that with enough care, enough heart, and enough people who still believe, local news can be saved.
The presses are humming again. The stories are ours again. The Courier lives on. What a history. 160 years and counting.
And here is to the next 160 more. And when we come back from the break, we'll be joined by the editor of the Courier, Nathalie Sturgeon. Welcome back to Good Day from the Bay. Our guest today is a familiar face, Nathalie Sturgeon. She's the editor of the Courier and a reporter and host at CHCO. You might also recognize her from her time at Global News as a video journalist, and before that as the editor of the Kings County Record in Sussex. Thank you so much for being our guest today, Nathalie.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, just from that intro, it already sounds like a very exciting career so far, Nathalie, but I have to ask, what inspired you to get into journalism in the first place?
Well, when I was younger, around the age of 6, I entered the foster care system, and so I went to live with a family. And there was so much uncertainty in my life in terms of, would I get a family? Would I need to meet a new social worker? Would I be changing families? But the one constant in my life was that I could sit down for the evening news. And that just happened to be CBC with Terry Sege, which I would eventually get to learn from at CBC later on in my career. But that was the constant that really existed in my life. And it gave me a sense of kind of peace and certainty. And then as I learned more about journalism, I learned about the impact that it can have on people's lives. And I wanted to be part of that change, and so that's why I decided to become a journalist.
Wow. And what was that constant like in your life? You talk about having the news in the evening and also growing up in the foster system. What was it like changing homes, and how did that really bring you on that path of being a reporter who deals with things like social justice?
I always like to joke and say that I am as successful as I am out of spite, because I for so long had been told, well, you can't do these things, or you're not going to be able to do these things. But the news was something, and it's kind of ironic that we say it was a constant, because it's always changing. Nothing is ever the same in news, but it felt like something that I could really put my intelligence into and put my passion into, and I still do that today, and I think it really, that point in my life really kind of planned the trajectory of my career and sort of the issues that I find most important in my work.
Mm-hmm. Journalism is obviously a very interesting industry to be a part of. It often brings us to different publications, to different networks. Tell us a little bit about how you got started and where your path led you and how you ended up here.
Yeah, so I've been doing this for almost a decade now, which seems like a long time, but I started my career, I went to St. Thomas University in Fredericton, and I took a 5-year course there, learning to do journalism. My first internship was in my 4th year with the Telegraph Journal, which is, as many people would know, is the major newspaper in New Brunswick. And then in my 5th year, which was my final year, I got to do an internship, 13 weeks with CBC, which was huge, significant. It's a funny story, actually. I had brought Terry Sege to my high school in grade 11 and grade 12. And I remember going into the CBC building in Fredericton on Regent Street, and I sat in the chair in the entryway, and he just happened to walk by because it was early in the morning, so he was still doing his shift, and he said, "You're Nathalie." He had remembered me from all that time when I was in high school. But anyway, I would go on to do 13 weeks, and then they eventually hired me on to do casual work, which is very common at the CBC. You basically fill in a bunch of different roles over time, and I learned a tremendous amount of stuff at CBC, kind of moving between roles. And then I would eventually move on to be the editor of the Kings County Record, as you mentioned. I was the youngest editor at the time, just 25 years old. And then I went to become a reporter during the COVID-19 pandemic at the Telegraph Journal. And then I signed on at Global News to be a video journalist, which is kind of an overwhelming change to go to print to broadcast. And now I'm here at CHCO-TV.
I wouldn't mind rewinding for a second, though, to talk about the first time you shared your story in an opinion piece, I believe for the Telegraph Journal, about growing up in the foster system. Why was it important for you to share that personal story? Why did it matter so much to have that known to people around New Brunswick, and I'm sure especially the youth?
The Telegraph was investigating group homes at the time in a series called the Broken Homes series, and it was by 2 fantastic reporters who had done a lot of investigative work, and they'd worked on this for months. And as I was reading it, I could see so many parallels between what these kids in group homes were experiencing and what I experienced, although this not the same. Foster care is different when you experience it from a group home as opposed to being settled with a family that takes care of you as kind of one of your own. but it really struck me that there are so many kids that are not going to be able to do what I do. The percentage of foster care kids that actually end up going to post-secondary education is below 10%. There is a strong correlation between the number of kids that are in the foster care system that are actually now homeless. It's actually a direct correlation. So I felt very strongly about sharing my experience, not to say that, look at me and my success, but that there is hope or there is light at the end of the tunnel, and that I saw them as someone who had been in their shoes and is now, not only surviving but thriving in the things that I'm able to do. So that's why it was very important for me to write that for them. And I hope that if they're watching this or they're still thinking about or feeling hopeless, that they know that there's options out there for them.
Wow, that's very powerful, and it's so inspirational, because it is, just such a tragedy that we have all these children who don't get the same encouragement and the same opportunities and the same hope to go forward, in life.
Yeah, I think it's really challenging. The system, as I said in that op-ed all those years ago, the system really does set these kids up to fail before they can even get going. They're not really offered the right opportunities or the right encouragement. And I was very fortunate to be adopted when I was 12 years old into a family that was very supportive and encouraging. And I was kind of a nightmare as a kid. I definitely wasn't the smoothest of transitions for my parents. They got a kid that was really troubled, that had really been through a lot of really traumatic experiences, and needed that extra love and support. And sometimes it had to be tough love. And I think that's part of my success, is that I did land on my feet. But again, I joked earlier that I've survived through spite, and I think that's part of it. I just wanted I wanted my life to be better, and the only way I knew how to do that was to work hard. So
you were adopted not only at age 12. Why is that a significant number in terms of what happens to a lot of kids in the system when they are age 12 and beyond?
That never happens. So there's a list of reasons on the Department of Social Development's website for reasons why children are not adopted, and one of them is they're 12 and over. So it's not to suggest that families don't want children, but they don't really like the idea of a teenager. That's the really most uncomfortable years of your life. And by the time you're 12 years old, and even if you've existed in the system or you're just coming into the system, you've probably dealt with a lot in your life so far, and they're probably really harsh circumstances that you're living through. So they're going to have issues and mental health problems, and maybe even health problems. Some of them are developmentally delayed. All of these reasons are reasons why children don't get adopted. So for me to be adopted at the age of 12 was a very significant thing, and I guess it speaks to my parents' want and desire to have a child of their very own. So I appreciate them, and I love them for that.
Yeah, it is a challenge. Like, I know in my family, my aunt and uncle adopted my cousin when she was 11, just about to turn 12. And it was really interesting, because I remember the first time I met her, I just had this instinctual feeling inside, like, you're one of us. Like, so we loved her, and we embraced her immediately. But that's not to say that, especially going forward into the teen years, there weren't a lot of challenges, because she had been through so much in her life, more than any of us could even wrap our heads around. But at the same time, I can't picture our family any way else. So, but again, she was one of the lucky ones that at that late age to be adopted.
Yeah, and it is. I think it is luck. I think the challenge is that these kids, people really don't understand that all these kids need is a chance, a little breath of life inside of them to really kind of bring out the best in who they are. And I've talked to a number of advocates that work with kids in the system, and they tell me all of the time that, my story would be something that would inspire them. And I don't like to think about it that way, but I really hope that if anything, they take from my story that there is possibility and there is success available to them, even if at every turn that they're met, someone says no. You got to just keep going anyway. No isn't the end of the story.
And I mean, that's why we so appreciate you sharing this story with viewers at home today. I think you know from joining this team, we're very much woven into the fabric of the community. So your willingness to share that with viewers at home will give a lot of people hope who might be in similar circumstances to see what kind of a person you can become, what kind of career you built, even drawing from your own experiences to become the person you are today. You've drawn on what happened to you and made it part of your superpower. And I knew when I first met you, I didn't know your backstory, but I knew what a great reporter you were. And so when you joined our team, it was not something you necessarily offered up to explain your whole backstory. But when I found out what it was, it really highlighted to me why you're so good at what you do, why you care so much, why you have the empathy that you have. But what advice would you give to any kid who's watching this right now, who may be in the shoes you were in right now and is watching this episode?
I find it difficult to give them advice because I find their circumstances are always going to be different, and they're going to be met with challenges now that I wouldn't have had when I was in the system. And I think the best advice that if I had to give them is you can't give up. There's going to be moments in your life throughout this system, and many of them are going to age out, right? Many of them are going to be there until they're 18, and then they're just going to be, foisted into the world to learn to live as adults without having very much support, because a lot of the supports that the government provides end when you're 18. So you have to really figure out how to be an adult very quickly. But the best advice that I could give you is don't give up on yourself, and don't give up on the things that you want to dream about. I remember talking to a group in St. John, and she was telling me about some teenagers that were there that were talking about wanting to be graphic designers or wanting to be all of these things, and they just couldn't imagine it because they didn't have the things that they needed to kind of get themselves there. But don't give up on your dreams. Continue to hope. Continue to think and embrace the ideas that you want to achieve, and hopefully, like me, you'll find someone along the way that opens the door for you. It just takes the one door, I think, to open for you to be successful.
And I think a lot of us were happy to find out here that being a part of CHCO-TV and the Courier factored into your dreams. So I have to ask, what made you say yes to coming here?
I've always been very passionate about local news. I really think that that's where the heart of local journalism lives. Really, what happens in your day-to-day life is impacted by your local governments and by the people who create clothing lines full of items that are needed in their communities, or who work at the food bank, or who work at the public library, or who work at the local television station. So I think it kind of come full circle, because I remember when I was at CBC, the producer of Information Morning, which is mainly local news, reached out to me and said, listen, you're really good at picking local stories. Why don't you come chase produce with us, which is kind of just chasing local stories and pre-producing them. And I said, yes, absolutely. So I've come full circle back to where I believe the roots of journalism and the roots of change can actually happen, which is local news.
Do we dare ask what it's like working with us?
I don't think so. We'll pass over that one. But this is so great.
Is this the part where I blink?
Not yet. But thank you for opening up and sharing your story so much. But I don't think we've got quite enough information yet. So when we come back, Nathalie will be taking the Good Day from the Bay questionnaire. Stay with us.
Welcome back to A Good Day from the Bay, where our guest Nathalie Sturgeon is about to take the famous Good Day from the Bay questionnaire. Nathalie, I have one question for you to get started. Are you ready?
Yeah, never. In this circumstance, I guess I have to be, eh?
Well, we're starting off with, what is the most adventurous thing you've ever done?
I think the most adventurous thing I've ever done, and it's not going to sound very adventurous to anyone else, is I took my first plane ride last May, which is something that I was very nervous for. I flew to Ottawa as part of a group exercise from the union that I was a part of, and that's literally the most adventurous thing. I was holding the edge of the airplane seat the whole time, but it was very fun. I mean, I think I'd do it again, but maybe in different circumstances, or maybe a shorter flight or something.
Oh, good thing you do local news.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, question 2. If you could only eat one cuisine for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Oh, Japanese.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, well, Japanese or Korean, I guess. I really love authentic Asian food. I make it a lot at home, so that's easy answer. Yeah.
Okay.
Where is your happy place?
My happy place is actually at home, and currently that's in St. Andrews in my lovely new apartment with my partner Liam, and really just cozied up on the couch with a good book. That's my happy place. Yeah.
Okay. And what's your favorite place, local place, to celebrate at with family or friends?
Oh my gosh, the herring. Okay. It's funny because when I came here on a vacation when I lived in Fredericton, I wanted to see the whales. So I came and I stayed in the Algonquin, and as I was walking to go whale watching on my last day of vacation here, Vicki shouted my name, and I didn't know it was Vicki. She said, "Nathalie Sturgeon." And I said yes, and that was the first time I'd ever met Vicki and Patrick, and I was leaving the herring after having some delicious wings. So the herring is probably my favorite place in town.
Good choice.
I'm Vicki from the COVID-19 news conferences. That's where we all knew each other at the time, but we were all voices because we weren't in the same room.
Yeah.
You had to close your eyes, and if you heard someone's voice, you're like, oh, I know that person.
That's funny.
This one could be many things, I'm sure. What keeps you awake at night with worry? Don't ask a journalist, but I am.
Oh my goodness, that's a horrifying question. Yeah, I think what keeps me up at night a lot is the news cycle that we're experiencing right now. There's a lot going on, personally, very locally. Municipalities are very challenged. There's a rising level of number of people who don't have affordable housing, homelessness, that sort of thing. It's kind of just the job in general that keeps me up at night. I think I feel very passionately about the issues that I cover, and so I think about it a lot, even when I'm not here, even though I'm here a lot. So, yeah.
Okay. Who in your life do you look up to the most?
That's a tough one. I think it's all the women in my life, Vicki, Flo, the people that really are part of my everyday life, that inspire me to just keep being who I am and keep doing what I'm doing. Women have it pretty tough in this industry, and I feel like anyone who is successful in here has done so in spite of the things that they've faced. And so I think the women in my life are the biggest inspirations for me.
And the feeling is mutual, I will say. I feel like we've got an amazing team here. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Don't take yourself too seriously. I remember early on in my career, I got that piece of advice because oftentimes it can become a matter of personality, right? I can't say I've been recognized a lot on the street, but it certainly happened. And in journalism, you have to carry a bit of humbleism into everything that you do. You don't know everything. And so use it as a learning experience. But yeah, I think keeping humble is the best part of what you can do.
I agree. That's really good advice. Okay, next question. What accomplishment are you most proud of?
Flip side of that.
What accomplishment am I most proud of? I want to say my career has been the entirety of it. I think, when kind of the work slowed at CBC, I felt like maybe that was the end of the line for me, and I ended up, bouncing back and becoming the youngest editor of a newspaper. I think my career, in spite of everything that I've been through, is probably my most proud accomplishment. Yeah.
Okay.
What is your guilty pleasure or current obsession?
Well, I have a few. So I think reality television is probably on the top of the list. I watch a lot of Real Housewives, for sure. I find their drama just so kind of next level. Like, you know what I mean? Like, they're not real problems, so to speak, I think. So anyway, I find it very easy to digest and very couch rot type environment. So that's my biggest guilty pleasure right now. So you heard it here first.
That's true. If you're awake at night with worry, that is one way to cure it, I will say.
Exactly.
Quiets the brain.
Exactly. I think we can both relate to that current obsession in one form or another. Okay, and we're almost at the end, so last question. If you could invent a holiday, what would it celebrate and how would you celebrate?
I would invent a holiday where I didn't have diabetes for one day. I have type 1 diabetes, and I would eat whatever I want without having to think about it.
Oh, so diabetes-free day.
Yeah, that's a good name. Yeah, so I could eat cake and ice cream and pizza and not have to take insulin. I think that would be a great holiday. And I would share it with every other diabetic that lives in this world.
Okay, we could have a parade down Water Street.
We could.
With just cakes and sweets on the sidewalks. All the way through. You just eat the whole way down Water Street. That would be great.
That'd be great.
All right.
Well, I feel like I can't imagine how much more we could get to know you on this show today, but then again, now we know
personal.
We could have you come back and talk about what it's like to live with diabetes. Maybe not the next episode, but very soon.
Sure, I'm game for anything.
I know. I appreciate you sharing your story, and I know you've shared it with having type 1 diabetes too.
Yeah, it's a bit of a burden, but if you manage it properly, you can thrive and survive, as I've said throughout the show. So yeah.
Well, I thank you so much for being here today. I know I'm going to see you all day long because you work here, but thank you for taking the time out to be on our show. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We'll be right back after this.
Welcome back to Good Day from the Bay. Well, patriotism in Canada is at an all-time high, which is a silver lining during these uncertain times. Canadians across the country have been holding Elbows Up Canada rallies in response to the trade war and U.S. President Donald Trump's ongoing suggestion that Canada should become the 51st state. The first Elbows Up rally fittingly took place in Ottawa, and the biggest one thus far was in Nathan Phillips Square in Toronto, and it drew a number of high-profile Canadians to the event. I had the chance to speak with Elbows Up co-organizer Peter Wall right before the big Toronto event. Here's that interview. Thank you so much for speaking with me today, Peter. Tell us first, the term Elbows Up is rooted in hockey culture. Why was that the perfect rallying cry for the rallies that you're organizing?
It's a good question. I think it's a rallying cry because people are using it, really, Vicki. It's a term that everyone has just responded to, and I actually woke up in the middle of the night 2 weeks ago with the thought that we need to get together as Canadians. We're going through a moment right now. This country is going through a moment, and we're all feeling this thing. We're emotional, we're angry, we're frustrated, we're concerned. It's kind of all rolled up into one. And I think when you're going through something, it's natural to want to gather. So that was kind of the feeling that I had. My wife had actually gone to a rally the day before in Ottawa, and it was kind of lame. It was a protest. It wasn't a rally. And I woke up in the middle of the night thinking, no, we need to gather to make a statement, not to protest, but to gather together and say, we love this country. It's brought us so much. We're so lucky to be Canadian, and let's be together.
Bring us back to that first rally in Ottawa. Tell us a little bit about what the feeling was there and really what you were expecting.
It was amazing. It was, we were flying by the seat of our pants. We'd had 5 days to put it together. The folks on Parliament Hill, the Ottawa Police, they were all great to work with. We had volunteers turn out to make it happen. We didn't even have a stage, Vicki, because we couldn't get a permit for a stage. So we built a box. My contractor in Ottawa, who's done a lot of renovating in our house, I called him up. I said, we're doing this thing. We need a box that we can turn into a little mini stage. So he built a 18-inch by 2x3 box. We put a bunch of stuff in it to carry things in. And then right before we started, we flipped it upside down and we stood up on it. And that was the stage. Because there was 1,000 people, 2,000 people there, and you needed to see this. We had Sean Majunder stand up. He needed a stage. But the feeling was amazing. It was, we laughed. All the cliches were true. We laughed, we cried, we sung. It was great. It was a really nice feeling of unity.
Were you surprised by how many people came out to the first one? And this is everyone from citizens to big names to politicians.
Yeah, I was surprised and I wasn't surprised. I mean, I was surprised in the sense that, you never know when you call for an event, how many people are going to show up. We don't know how many people are going to be in Toronto tomorrow. And so I was surprised that people came out. People work hard. They have jobs. They, have lives, and to go to an event to gather together is not something that, a lot of people put in their schedule for the weekend. But on the other hand, I wasn't surprised because I think, again, like I said at the start, it's natural for us to want to gather together, to be together when we're going through something. And we are going through a moment as a country right now.
Tell us a little bit about what the response has been like from Canadians after the first rally. I know you're going into the Toronto rally tomorrow, but what have you been hearing from Canadians who maybe didn't get to go to the first rally but got wind of it and have been inspired by it?
Yeah, the response has been amazing. I mean, our social media has blown up. We started this account 2 weeks ago, and or various accounts 2 weeks ago. We've had great traction. We put a video up from Margaret Atwood, kind of sending her regards 2 days ago, and it's got like a crazy amount of views in the hundreds of thousands at this point. So the response has been good, and I think that's great. I think all of us are engaged in the digital sphere right now, on our social feeds talking about this. But I also think it's really great to come together. And that's why these events are really powerful, because it's nice to be with other people when you're going through a common experience. And, we have funerals and birthday parties and, marriages for this reason. You come together as humans when you're having a shared experience. So that's what we want to see, and we'll see how it goes tomorrow in Toronto.
Why do you think Trump's, not just the trade war, but his comments on Canada becoming the 51st state have struck such a chord with Canadians? I think before this happened, so many of us actually didn't know what the response would be across Canada to a suggestion that we join the United States, and now it's very clear what most Canadians are feeling.
I think, Canadians are very quietly patriotic. We're patriotic in a way that it's not in your face, and that's always sort of been the case. But when our backs are against the wall and when push comes to shove, we're proud to be Canadian. And that's certainly how I feel. And I think, this kind of whatever it is, this rhetoric that's coming from the United States is pushing Canadians to say, hey, listen, Americans, we love you. You're great neighbors. You're our cousins. You've been our closest, relatives for a long time. But we don't want to get married. You don't want to marry your cousin. So that's kind of, I think, how most Canadians are feeling. It's not about being anti-American. It's just about wanting to be Canadian.
Has it changed your own sense of national identity going through this? I think sometimes when we do feel a sense of threat, it can really change your patriotism.
Yeah, I think it has, in the sense that, I'm not the kind of guy that would walk around with a Canada flag cape, on Canada Day. I love Canada Day. It's a nice holiday, but I think it's brought out, not just amongst me, but amongst, I think, a lot of my friends and my network and my community, a sense that we actually are very proud to be Canadian, and we've got something pretty special and pretty unique, and it's worth standing up for.
What message do you hope people take away from these rallies? And I don't mean just Canadians, but also the administration in the U.S. They're obviously seeing things like this on our news, and it's making international news.
Yeah, I hope that Canadians take away a sense that you can do something. You can, you don't have to feel, it's okay to feel frustrated and concerned and all of these things, but it's actually really great to channel that energy into something. I know for myself, like for the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and my wife and, other folks, we have quite a large organizing team of about 50 people now working on this. And all of us are feeling like much more hopeful, much more optimistic, much more energized by working together and coming together and talking about these issues and talking about what it means to be Canadian. And then in terms of how it lands with the Americans, we don't have any control over that. Ultimately, I think the one thing that we've learned, which is good, is that, and maybe it's the silver lining, is that Canada needs to, take care of itself and needs to be connected to a world economy and, not just a southern neighbor who, has proven themselves to be right now not the close friend that we've had for so long.
Can you tell me a little bit about some of the big name Canadians that you've had participating in the rallies you've done so far? I did see that there was a Margaret Atwood video, and I couldn't help but think that the author of The Handmaid's Tale, how much she's predicted a lot of what we're seeing happen in the US right now to some degree. But tell us about how people got involved, from Sean to Jim Cuddy, Arlene, and even the mayors.
Yeah, I mean, so let me start with Ottawa. We had Lloyd Axworthy who came up, and it was great. He's a elder at this point, and he's been around for a long time. He spoke very passionately. Sean, was connected in my network, and I asked him, and right away he said yes. He's got a great story. He just moved back from Canada. Just moved back from the United States to Canada after being in the U.S. for a long time, and is very passionate about his love of Canada. Arlene Dickinson, who has been also very vocal about this over the last month or so. And, again, I have a friend who knows her and reached out, and right away she was on board. So it's really just kind of snowballed amongst the folks who are speaking and performing. Jim Cuddy, same thing, sort of friend of a friend of a friend, reached out to him, and he's like, if this is real, I'm in. And so, Jim's going to be performing tomorrow, and that's super exciting.
How can people get involved, whether it's just following you on social media or potentially organizing a rally of their own for their community?
Yeah, so you can follow us on social media, Elbows Up Canada. In terms of organizing a rally of their own, we're actually going to launch this weekend a toolkit for Canadians to organize events in their own communities. So we're going to put that up on our website. Hopefully it'll be ready this weekend. It's a Google Drive folder, and it's got the logo. It's got, a breakdown of how we've done it, suggestions on how you can organize people and gather people together. Also, one of our core values is nonpartisanship, and that's really important, that we think as we come together as Canadians, it doesn't matter your political beliefs. We all believe in this project that is Canada, this country that is Canada. And so we have a breakdown of our values, nonpartisan, peaceful, empowering, these sort of things, because I think the one thing we really did in Ottawa, and I'm expecting it to be true as well in Toronto, is we got the energy right. Like, the vibe was right. It wasn't angry, it certainly was frustrated and people are annoyed, but it wasn't a protest, it was a statement. And that's what we're really trying to encourage people to think of these events as.
Are you finding that there's a silver lining to this moment in time that we're living in, where as much as it may be one of the most confusing and scary times, there's also this feeling across our country? It's first in my lifetime that I've known or felt this, having grown up across Canada. It's the first time it's felt like we're unified in my lifetime. How are you feeling?
No, I totally feel that. No, I think you're right. I think, I think that is the silver lining, is that Canada is more connected and unified, and, we all feel like we're kind of pulling in the same direction. We're all in the same big canoe, and that's a wonderful feeling. It's nice to feel that kind of connection with our fellow Canadians from coast to coast to coast.
As you go into tomorrow, Peter, what are your final thoughts, and what do you hope is the long-term impact of these rallies?
So my final thoughts is, if you have friends in Toronto, tell them to come March 22nd, or Saturday, 2 p.m. And then I guess my final thoughts are, I think this is going to be a marathon, not a race. And I think, those of us that are doing this, that are volunteering as part of this organizing committee, this team, I think we're trying not to burn out, and trying to spread it so that people can feel empowered to do this in their own communities. And then we're hoping to have larger events. I don't know. We don't know what the cadence is going to be, but fairly frequently, but not too frequently that we burn out, in places like Vancouver, Halifax, Montreal, Calgary, maybe another one in Ottawa. So yeah, that's kind of what we're thinking. We're hoping this is just going to continue to grow.
Well, I think in the name of the late, great Terry Fox and his Marathon of Hope, Canadians are always prepared for a marathon. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Vicki. Great to be on.
That was my interview with Elbows Up co-organizer Peter Wall. We'll be right back with more Good Day from the Bay after this.
Welcome back to Good Day from the Bay.
Jonathan, we launched this show about a year ago, I can't believe it, and on one of our very first episodes, we celebrated Evelyn Calder of Campobello.
Yes, and we are celebrating Evelyn again today, who turned 108 years old on April 1st.
Evelyn was joined by her daughter at the Campobello Lodge for a festive party with friends, family, residents, and staff.
You're an inspiration, Evelyn. What's your secret?
I think it's the salty air on Campobello.
Well, that's all for today's show.
We will see you next time on Good Day from the Bay.
Good Day from the Bay is produced through the facilities of CHCO Television with support from people in our region.